This time, I decided not to spend this family holiday alone and cry in despair. I've done that 6 times already. I bought a cabin in the mountains and invited the whole family for Christmas. I timed their arrival just as a snowstorm was starting. I wrecked their cars, and the road was snowed in, so help wouldn't get here for a week. Now my family is at my complete disposal. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. I'm 64 years old, a retired school librarian with a fondness for crosswords, casseroles, and justice served hot. I have 2 sons, Peter and Mark, both in their 40s, both good men if you catch them alone at a diner counter but suddenly thoughtless in a crowd, like sweets left in a hot car. Somewhere along the way when I wasn't watching, the holiday calendar turned into a competition among their wives' families. There were brunches with mom and dad, not me, Christmas Eve at Nana's, also not me, and cozy pajama mornings with the grandparents, again, not me. I learned the choreography of exclusion, the tentative texts, the we're on the other side of town explanations, the promises to FaceTime later that came after the dishes were washed and the kids were already asleep. 6 Christmases. 6! The first year, I cried quietly so I wouldn't make the dog nervous. The second year, I made eggnog for one and toasted the television. The third, a blizzard clogged the streets and I bundled up and walked alone, and a neighbor boy waved like I was an odd ornament on the street. The fourth year, I tried to be gracious about it. Next year, and my voice sounded like I'd swallowed a spoon. The fifth, I volunteered at a soup kitchen and smiled until my cheeks hurt. But that night, when the lights were off, I felt invisible. The sixth year, last year, I told myself I was fine, truly fine, a word that usually means the opposite. I wrapped gifts for my grandsons and mailed them with fat bows that would arrive crushed. When spring rolled around, I took a long look at my tidy little bungalow with the squeaky screen door and the rhododendrons bursting like fireworks. And I felt something shift. It wasn't anger exactly. I don't hold grudges well. I misplace them like reading glasses. But there's a particular sting to being left out by your own children, and sting is a motivator. I realized, plain as day, I needed a stage. Not for a tantrum, for a lesson. I've always loved the mountains. My parents took us up to the Smokies when I was 9, and I learned how pine sap glues itself to your fingerprints and how sound travels differently over snow. There's an old state road that curls through white-barked birches and drops you into a valley where a blue lake sits like a lost marble. That's where I found the cabin, sturdy, cedar-sided, with a stone fireplace that still smelled of old campfire and cinnamon candles. The listing photo showed quilts folded like obedient soldiers and a kitchen with a gas range big enough to roast a small dragon. I stood on the wraparound porch and thought, this will do. Buying it felt scandalous. I dipped into savings, the same savings I'd intended for someday trips and emergencies, and I considered the possibility that I was perhaps both. The realtor, a serious woman with a chunky turquoise bracelet, asked me what my plans were. A family Christmas, a big one. She nodded and tapped her pen. You'll want to watch the weather. Oh, I watched the weather. I watched it like I used to watch students in the back row pass notes they thought I couldn't see. December in the mountains is a coin toss. Bluebird skies or a whiteout that turns the world into a snow globe shaken by a toddler. I read the forecasts, talked to the old-timers at the general store, learned the cadence of clouds. When the long-range models started whispering about a Christmas week storm, I sent invitations. Old-fashioned paper ones I printed at the library because I still have my card and the printer there is faster than mine. Christmas at Mom's Mountain Cabin, the invite trumpeted, snowflakes dancing around the edges. Arrived December 22nd for a week of family, food, and festivities.
I texted too, because that's how people are now. Peter responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a "we'll try." Mark called to say it sounded fun, which is the word you use when you mean, "we'll see if the other side of the family gets to you first." I could almost hear the gears turning. Logistics, obligations, the low hum of a priority system I'd never quite cracked. This time, I took out my screwdriver and cracked it. Now, before you clutch your pearls, let me say this. I am not reckless. I am a planner. A librarian doesn't walk into chaos. She charts a map and labels the sections. I didn't want anyone hurt. I wanted undivided attention and the kind of captive audience you only get at weddings, funerals, or weather events. The storm was the curtain drop. What happened with the cars? Well, there are a dozen ways vehicles misbehave in the cold. A wire that behaves like a stubborn child. A battery that decides it's had enough. A gas cap that freezes the way family conversations do when the wrong name is mentioned. I will not be giving tutorials. I will say only that when my family took the turn onto the forest road, their trusty cars became less trusty. And the snow, punctual as an old church bell, began to fall. They arrived one by one like actors entering stage left, brushing snow from their hats, voices pitched too bright. Peter's SUV chuffed up the drive and stalled with a noise like a cough. He slapped the dashboard. Olivia, my daughter-in-law, peered at the speedometer like it had insulted her. Their boys tumbled out, all elbows and chatter, then fell quiet at the sight of the lake, steel gray and still. "Grandma," they hollered, and the word ricocheted off the pines. I hugged them and inhaled their cold, woolly smell, and for a second, I almost forgot my script. Mark and his wife Jenna were 20 minutes behind, which is to say the snow deepened, and by the time they turned into the drive, the flakes were fatter, and the road behind them looked erased. "Mom!" Mark shouted, grinning like this was a summer barbecue and not an unfolding experiment. "We made it!" The baby, their surprise caboose, was asleep in his bundly car seat, cheeks pink as an ornament. Jenna handed me a tin of fudge and a candle that smelled aggressively of gingerbread. "This is gorgeous," she said, looking up at the icicles. "Is there Wi-Fi?" "Spotty," I told her. "It's part of the charm." There are moments when the complicated people we love are disarmingly simple. When a child laughs and all you see is his front teeth too big for his smile. Or when your grown son is shaking snow from his hair and it's the same boy who used to come home with grass stains and a note from the gym teacher. Those moments can trick you. They can make you think you dreamed the last 6 years. But the storm was honest, and honesty was the point. I had the tree up, fat and short like an old mare, with too many lights because restraint is for summer. The cabin glowed, the fire snapped. I'd laid out mugs and cocoa mix and the marshmallows I'd hidden like contraband back when my boys were sugar bandits. I kept the kitchen warm and inviting because I learned long ago that even people who don't want your company want your cooking. They took off coats, married people chirped at each other about boots and mittens, children cataloged the sleeping arrangements like auditors. "We'll put the baby in here," Jenna said, opening a door to a little loft room with a slanted ceiling and a window that framed a pine like a postcard. "Do you have a sound machine?" She asked it sweetly, like we weren't 4 hours from the nearest Target. "I do, as it happens. I have many things." Librarians are quiet hoarders. By dusk, the storm had turned serious. The road, what you could see of it, looked like something a baker had sifted sugar over to hide imperfections. I stirred the stew I'd started earlier, something hearty and forgiving, and everyone gathered in that natural way families do when food announces itself. We didn't take a photo. No one suggested it. I filed that away. After dinner, we stood at the big picture window and watched the snow fall in the cone of the porch light. It's hypnotic snow. Each flake suddenly illuminated, flying into relevance, then gone. "Kinda magical," Peter said, looping an arm around Olivia's shoulders. "Like a Hallmark movie." "Let's hope it's not the kind where the main character gets stranded," Olivia said, laughing a little too loudly.
"We'll be fine," I told her, and sipped my tea. When the power blinked, it was only for a second, a warning cough. The generator kicked in with a dog's growl. I'd had it serviced the week before, an investment that made the handyman whistle low. Preparedness is a kind of love, I think. The weather radio on the counter muttered advisories like a fussy uncle.
Blizzard warning. Travel impossible. Travel impossible. There it was, in language even my family couldn't spin. We settled into the evening. Cards on the table, literally. A game of gin rummy where the boys kept trying to make up rules. I should tell you about them, my grandsons. Henry is 10, and so literal he could be a chartered accountant already. If you say you'll be ready in a minute, he times you. Leo is 8, and feathery, ideas and feelings and sudden somersaults. The baby, Max, is a happy loaf with 2 teeth and a drool bib that could catch small fish. Mark handed me a fresh deck. "Your house, your rules," he said. The phrase snagged at me. My house. It'd been a long time since I'd had that kind of ground. We played, we laughed, we pretended this was normal. And when bedtime came, the boys dragged their duffel bags down the hall and the women compared moisturizer like it was a spiritual practice. And Peter and Mark stood by the fire, rubbing their hands and talking about nothing at all. I waited. The weather radio coughed again. The wind picked up, shouldering the trees. A draft spoke through the window frames. The cabin, old and practical, creaked the way old things do when they're settling in for the long haul. That's when Peter said, casual as a shoe left in the hall, "We might head down early on the 24th. Olivia's parents are doing a thing, a big brunch." I looked at the fire, breathed in cedar, counted to 5 the way I used to with kindergartners, teachers, and myself. "The road will be closed," I said lightly. "You heard the radio." "Maybe not," Olivia said, hope wrapped around the question like tinsel that won't stay put. "Sometimes it is," I agreed. "Sometimes it's worse." There are truths I'd practiced saying alone in my kitchen, chewing on them like tough meat. I'd planned the monologue, how being left out felt like a door slowly closing, how traditions include people not because they're convenient, but because they're ours, how grandparents are not interchangeable like coffee filters. But the storm had locked the door for me, and I realized the best speeches are lived, not spoken. We parted for the night with the uneasy truce of a family pretending to be easy. I climbed into my bed under a quilt pieced by women whose names I don't know, and for the first time in years, on the cusp of Christmas, I didn't cry. I lay awake listening to the wind braid itself through the trees, and I felt, I won't sugarcoat this, I felt a little wicked, but I also felt calm. Somehow those two feelings folded into each other like batter. Sometime after midnight, the generator hiccuped, and the heat knocked, and someone in the loft laughed in their sleep. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon and wet mittens drying by the hearth. I imagined the road down the mountain, silent, drifted, all possibility erased by weather's firm hand. No brunches, no other plans, no last-minute departures with, "We'll catch you next time." Only us, in this box of light in the dark. Morning arrived slow and sideways. When I padded into the kitchen, the world outside the windows was white. Not a blank page, exactly, but a page written on in invisible ink. I put coffee on. Olivia came in first, hair in a scrunchie, smile tentative. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Like a log," I said. "How about you?" "Like a person with a baby," she said. And we both smiled, because some truths are universal. Mark checked his phone and frowned at the spinning wheel where a signal should be. "We might need to go check on the cars," he said, and I nodded and handed him a slice of toast. He and Mark pulled on boots and stepped into the morning with the exaggerated heroics of men about to wrestle a snowbank. They were back in 15 minutes, dusted white like badly powdered donuts. "We're not going anywhere," Mark reported, cheerful, because he's always been that way in the first hour of a crisis. "Drifts up to my hip." "You're tall," I said, and we laughed. We settled into the rhythm of a day without schedules. Cards again. Puzzles. The boys learned how to stack kindling without collapsing it, an old skill dressed up as a challenge. Olivia and Jenna took turns bouncing Max and whisper singing to him while he squinted at the light. I made a pot of mulled cider in the old blue enamel pot that came with the cabin, and the cinnamon unfurled itself in the air with a bossy confidence. The world beyond the porch stayed smudged. Around noon, a plow rumbled by on the highway far below, a sound like a distant avalanche. It didn't come up our road. Good. I took them on a tour of the cabin, my cabin now, showing them the cubbies where extra blankets live, the hooks that always catch a sweater, the trapdoor to the root cellar that I haven't decided whether to be charmed or creeped out by. The boys wanted to see everything. I told them stories about cabin life I mostly invented from whole cloth. How the man who built it used to play fiddle on the porch and the bobcats would stop in the trees to listen. How the lake once froze so fast it trapped fish mid-swim. Henry said this was impossible. I told him, sometimes stories are meant to be appreciated, not audited. We were improbably making memories, exactly the thing I'd spent 6 years missing. Late afternoon, clouds lifted for a breath, and sunlight fell across the lake like a visiting aunt who doesn't stay long. We layered up and went outside, because you don't argue with winter when it shows you its kind face. Leo flopped into the snow like a man fainting at the sight of a bill, and made an angel with wings too close to his body because he's small for 8. Peter tried to start a snowball fight and promptly forgot he was twice the size of his nephews. He apologized theatrically and surrendered, hands up. Jenna took a picture of me with the boys, our faces pinched with cold and grinning anyway, and I tucked that image somewhere private. Proof. When we came in, cheeks flaming, the generator shuddered and went quiet. The house exhaled. The silence that followed felt like a person stepping into a room where you're not sure if you're welcome. Then the fire popped, such a civilized sound. And we all remembered that people heated homes and cooked meals long before electricity. Mark lit candles like a magician producing handkerchiefs. Olivia said, "This is kind of cozy, isn't it?" And for a moment it was. Uncomplicatedly so. Dinner by candlelight, not because it's romantic, but because the day insisted it. I ladled stew into bowls and the boys slurped like Dickensian orphans. Max squawked at the shadows and then relaxed. Babies are honest barometers. Conversation was easier in the dark. People's faces glow in candlelight, and maybe we have fewer sharp edges that way. Peter asked about my book club. Still reading books with pastel covers and heavy topics? Jenna told a story about the preschool holiday pageant where the shepherd peed his pants and everyone applauded anyway. We laughed the kind of laughter that pushes other things to the back of the shelf. And then just as the cabin yawned into evening, we heard it. The wind rising like a crowd, the snow rattling the windows lightly, the weather radio clearing its throat. Blizzard conditions will persist through the night and into tomorrow. Travel not advised. Road closures expected. Stay where you are. We all looked at each other like the radio had just read our diaries. "Guess we're in it," Mark said. I smiled into my mug. We're in it.
There are people who think revenge is a bright, sharp thing. In my experience, it's quieter. It's the satisfaction of setting a table and knowing someone will sit. It's a story told with a steady voice. It's a plan that comes together with the inevitability of a good book's last chapter. I hadn't ruined anything. Not really. I had rearranged the furniture of fate for a week. That first night, after the kids went to bed and the house settled into its humming, I stepped onto the porch. The air was a medicine you don't enjoy taking. The snow had rounded the edges off every surface, like nature forgiving us. Somewhere in the trees, a branch cracked, with the sound of a pistol shot, and then all was still again. I thought about the 6 Christmases I'd spent trying not to take up space in my own life. I thought about how, right now, My family was asleep under my roof, and I felt not vindicated exactly, anchored. Back inside, I checked the woodpile, nudged the fire like it was a child's shoulder, and stood for a long moment in the living room. Tomorrow, I told myself, we'll make a day of it. We'll cut kindling, play board games we never finish, teach the boys to cheat at checkers the way their grandfather taught their father. Maybe we'll bake cookies in the shape of our bad decisions. We would be, if I had anything to say about it, together. I'll be honest, part of me enjoyed the stage managing. I've spent a lifetime being gentle and reasonable, the woman in the background making sure the batteries in the thermostat are replaced, the bills are paid on time, the reservations confirmed. There is a powerful thrill to pulling the levers, even if the lever is just weather and the strings are just family. I'm not ashamed of that. Before I turned in, I put a note on the fridge, written in black marker in my steadier-than-average print. Tomorrow, wood chopping contest. Winner gets first pick of stockings. I taped 2 candy canes under it for incentive because I'm nothing if not festive. In bed, the wind tried the windows, found them stout, and moved on. I slept like a person who finally believed her own plan. Morning didn't care about my plans, of course. Morning never does. The generator napped, the fire burned low, and my phone had given up the ghost sometime around the witching hour. I made coffee on the gas range with the stubbornness of a pioneer, and it tasted like victory. We ate oatmeal that pretended to be fancy because I grated an apple into it and sprinkled cinnamon like a TV chef. Spirits were high. Then Henry, precise Henry, frowned at the window. "Grandma," he said, careful as a news anchor, "what if we run out of wood?" "We won't," I said, with the breezy confidence of a grown woman uttering a sentence she fully intends to make true. "We could get more," Leo said, already on the adventure, small chest puffed, eyes bright as marbles. "We could," I agreed. Peter and Mark exchanged a look. The storm had softened to steady snow, the kind you could walk through if you surrendered to getting damp. "We should top off the stack," Peter said, "in case the generator keeps napping." I looked at the woods, black and white and quiet. The lake beyond, hidden under its lid. The path I'd marked last week with bright ribbon like a breadcrumb trail. I looked at my sons, good men with busy lives and thoughtless habits. I looked at my grandsons, buzzy with the promise of doing something that mattered. I said, "Let's do it, but we do it my way." And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. We bundled up, scars like muffled plans, mittens fat with good intentions. I packed thermoses, cocoa for the boys, coffee for me and Peter, and slipped a whistle into my pocket, because a good librarian knows to dog-ear a page before she wanders off. I told Olivia and Jenna we'd be back within the hour. Jenna looked relieved. Olivia looked skeptical. Both of them looked like women measuring the distance between a plan and reality. We stepped into the trees. Snow absorbs sound. It's one of my favorite facts. After the first 100 yards, the cabin became something you looked for with your memory, not your eyes. We followed the marked path. The ribbons I'd tied where the branches made little doorways. I taught the boys how to spot standing deadwood, the kind that burns hot and fast, and we found a small treasure trove of fallen limbs that stayed dry under a dense pine. We worked. We sweat under our coats. We laughed when Leo tried to lift something bigger than his grand ambitions. Peter watched me with that expression I've only seen on him when he's surprised he needs me. I admit, I basked.
When the sled was piled, we turned for home. The woods have a trickster's heart. Paths you swear are straight curve a little. Ribbons disappear when the light shifts. The air itself seems to lean. I stopped, planted my boots, looked around like the forest was a map I hadn't studied closely enough. The boys, for once, were quiet. "Grandma?" "Hush a minute," I said, calm as a Sunday morning, but stern enough that they stood still. I listened. The wind, the whisper of snow through branches. No generator hum,
no road noise. Another fact, in winter, sound travels strangely. You can hear a far-off thing and miss something close. I felt Peter watching me, waiting for me to be the compass I've always been. "Okay," I said, cheerful, unthreatened. "We take the long way. It'll be prettier." Henry nodded like this was a field trip and he'd read the permission slip. Leo jumped into my footsteps like his feet were magnets. Peter said nothing, which is how he asks a question. The long way happened because I let it. The woods rearranged themselves the way families do, lovingly, stubbornly, according to their own logic. We walked. We talked about nothing. I told the boys about the time their father ate a whole jar of maraschino cherries and then swore he was dying because his tongue turned red. We rested on a fallen log and drank cocoa that steamed the air and tasted like childhood plus a dash of defiance. Peter asked lightly, "We good?" I smiled lightly. "We are." Here's the thing. Sometimes people need to feel a little lost before they can appreciate the path. Sometimes men who make schedules around other people need to seed the itinerary. Sometimes boys need to see that grandma doesn't rattle. Snow fell in lacy sheets. The sky held its breath. We kept walking. Peter didn't say the word lost. He kept glancing at the sky like it had a clock on it, and I kept walking like I knew exactly where I was, because in a way, I did. I'd come out a week before, no storm then, just a grumpy wind and a few patchy drifts, and I'd memorized landmarks the way I used to memorize library call numbers. A birch with a lightning scar, a stump with a shelf fungus shaped like a teacup, a boulder that looked like a seal taking a nap. I also knew the odd way snow smooths a landscape until the whole world looks like it's wearing one white sweater. "Grandma?" Leo's voice was small enough to fit in my pocket. "Are we okay?" "We're better than okay," I said, cheerful and firm. "We're on an adventure. Want to hear a secret?" I leaned in like we were plotting to steal cookies. The woods don't want to hurt anybody. You go slow, you pay attention, you stay warm, and you use your eyes and ears. The woods will show you where to go next. Henry digested that, already ranking it against a YouTube video he watched on orienting. "What if she doesn't?" he asked, giving the woods pronouns as cool as a news anchor. "Then we sit tight and drink cocoa and wait for her to change her mind. There's no rush. No brunches here." Peter huffed a laugh that told me he heard what I'd meant him to hear. We trudged past the birch with the lightning scar, then past a twin birch that did a mean impression of it. The ribbons I'd tied were hidden under iced-over sleeves of snow. Every now and then, I could see the red peeking through like lipstick in a church purse. The sled's rope dug a groove into Peter's glove, and he switched hands without complaining. I taught the boys how to stomp their feet if their toes felt cold, how to keep moving just enough. I joked about how this was Boy Scout camp without the undercooked hot dogs, and Leo declared that he loved undercooked hot dogs, which is exactly the kind of hill an 8-year-old chooses to die on. The hush of the trees settled into a new register, a little more wind, a little less patience. Big flakes drifted down, lazy as teenagers, then suddenly got it together and started falling with purpose. The whole forest dimmed by a shade like someone pinched the wick of a candle. Peter shifted closer to the boys. His voice was even, but he was measuring. "Mom, we should pick a direction and stick to it." "Agreed." "Left, toward the lake." "How do you know?" Henry asked. "Because the pines on this side grow a little stubbier. And because I can smell it." "You can smell the lake?" Leo's eyes were big as saucers. "Cold water has a clean smell, like when you open the freezer." We walked. I let us keep getting more lost,
for about 15 minutes longer than strictly necessary, because there's a particular silence people reach when they run out of chatter and arrive at honesty. Peter hit it first. "Mom," he said, plain as a pancake, "I'm sorry."
For what? I asked, like I didn't know, like I wanted him to choose the words on purpose. For last year, for the years before, for letting the calendar get away from me. His face was pink with cold and sincerity, and I had to pretend to adjust my scarf so I didn't get embarrassingly gooey. "We all let things get away from us," I said. "Right now, we're letting this trail get away from us." Leo laughed out loud, pure relief. Even Henry smiled, and in his case, that's basically a notarized confession of joy. We came to the boulder that looks like a seal. I patted its rounded back. "There we are," I said. "Home's that way." "How can you tell?" Henry asked, still the auditor. "Because this old gal faces the sun in the afternoons," I said, thumping the boulder's nose. "South is there. Cabins east of south. And because you can hear the wind squeezing itself through the porch slats if you listen hard enough." We stopped and listened. The wind wasn't a sound so much as a feeling in your teeth, but under it there was a faint hum. Nothing electrical, the generator still napping, but a kind of human noise that doesn't exist in honest woods. The memory of a house. "Okay," Peter said, voice light, eyes wet. "Lead the way." I didn't gloat. I didn't even grin. I just nodded once. Command received, accepted, and trudged forward in a rhythm I'd been practicing in my bones since the day I brought the cabin key home and set it by my tea kettle like a talisman. 15 minutes of careful walking, the sled bumping behind us, the boys stepping in our footprints like little shadow puppets, and there it was. The cabin appeared the way a ship does in old novels. Sudden, inevitable, a square of color in a white world. Smoke from the chimney wrote its soft sentence in the air. Leo whooped. Henry made a sound that wasn't a word but was definitely a feeling. Peter exhaled a laugh that fell apart and put his mitten on my shoulder. "You're something else, Mom," he said. I was really scared for a minute." "Me too," I said, and that was true enough to count. We trudged up the steps and flung open the door like we were conquering heroes. The warm air slapped our faces, and it felt like love. Olivia and Jenna were standing by the window like cats watching birds, and when they saw us, they both sagged. "Oh, thank God," Olivia said, then covered the words with a smile. "How'd it go?" "Splendidly," I said, and the boys burst out with overlapping reports. "Grandma smells the lake. The trees are spies. The rock is a seal. My toes hurt, then they didn't. Peter got quiet like a statue. We have wood like pirates." Peter hugged Jenna. He grinned over her shoulder at me like a man who's just seen a magic trick and isn't mad about it. Olivia squeezed my hand too, longed to be polite, grateful in a way she'd never had to be with me before. I put the cocoa thermos on the counter and then had to take off my gloves to get the lid unstuck. Mid-adventure glamour only gets you so far. While Peter and the boys stacked the fresh haul by the hearth, I set out an "I told you so" platter in the only way a mother can. Cheese, pickles, crackers, little coins of summer sausage, a bowl of green grapes like edible ornaments. Food is an apology and a blessing and a ceasefire all at once. We thawed out to the crackle of logs and the sound of Max discovering with great urgency that his toes existed. The generator caught a second wind and rumbled awake. The lights blinked on with the bashful excitement of a child who thought he wasn't invited and then was. Music crawled out of the Bluetooth speaker like a relieved house cat. "Play Christmas playlist," Jenna said, and the cabin obliged with a crooner from the 60s who thinks everything can be solved with sleigh bells. For once, I didn't argue with that. We spent the afternoon doing what families do when they have nothing but time, teaching the boys the world's worst magic tricks with coins that disappear up sleeves, playing a lopsided game of Monopoly that made us all briefly hate capitalism and each other, taking turns holding Max while he gnawed a rubber ring like it owed him money.
Olivia, who can sometimes be as carefully curated as her Instagram grid, turned surprisingly silly when it came to charades, acting out fruitcake with such tragic seriousness that even Henry cackled.
When the sun slid away and the windows filled with our reflections, the talk drifted to Christmas plans, the ones we'd had, the ones being rewritten by the storm. "Mom," Peter started. "I called my in-laws. They're disappointed, but they understand. We'll FaceTime them tomorrow." He looked at me and didn't blink. "We're here." That sentence, 2 small words, walked over to the tender place in my chest and sat down. I just nodded like it was nothing. I do a very good "it's nothing." That night, after the kids were in bed and the house felt like a gentle secret, Mark and I stood by the fire like we used to stand by the open refrigerator when he was 16 and we were avoiding a conversation about report cards. He nudged my shoulder with his. "You always liked theater," he said. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, amused. "Just that you're a good director." "Actors keep improvising," I said. "Hard to stick to the script." "Sometimes that's the best part," he said. And he had the same grin he wore when he was 5 and voluntarily gave a cookie to his brother without being told. We cleaned up the last of the mugs and shuffled off to our rooms. But I didn't sleep right away. I lay awake thinking about the next act. Because if a storm gives you a stage, you don't waste the performance on one good scene. I listened to the house settle and counted my blessings like buttons. Everyone under my roof, wood in the rack, stew left for tomorrow, a plan for the morning that would make them say, "Remember that Christmas?" The kind of memory that fastens 2 people together in a way polite holidays never do. I got up quietly, padded into the kitchen, and took stock like the logistics captain I was born to be. We had supplies, plenty, really, but scarcity isn't always about the pantry. It's also about attention, about the way people look at each other when they think there's not enough of something to go around. I don't believe in starvation diets, emotional or otherwise. I do believe in a little drama to sharpen the senses. So, at 2 in the morning, while the generator muttered and the wind rehearsed its lines outside, I staged something small and silly, and I'll admit it, theatrical. I dragged a cooler, empty, but for a note, onto the porch, and dusted a scattering of flour along the boards near the door. Flour footprints are a librarian's answer to a Broadway prop, dramatic at a glance, harmless under investigation. I knocked a pot off the counter so it would look convincingly chaotic. I took a jar of honey, drizzled a few loops near the back door, and then wiped them up with a rag to leave a tacky memory. And I dangled the big baking sheet by the edge of the sink so it would crash with a satisfying household thunder when someone tugged the wrong towel. Before you clutch your pearls, I do not encourage wildlife tourism or food theft, and I would never endanger my family. Everything I did could be put back right in minutes, and nothing smelled real enough to invite an actual bear to brunch. But the idea of a bear, the story of a bear, that's as old as Christmas itself. I slipped back to bed with the glee of a teenager who'd rearranged the living room and was about to watch their parents pretend not to notice. Morning showed up late and blurry, like it had stayed up watching reruns. I made coffee and rattled the cabinets and waited for my cue. Henry wandered out first, hair sticking up like a science experiment. He froze. "Grandma," he said, voice low and reverent, "did a raccoon break in?" "Raccoons don't like honey," I said solemnly, pointing at the faint, sticky trail with my chin. Leo appeared, rubbed his eyes, gasped, and then put both hands on his cheeks like a cartoon in a museum. "A bear!" he whispered so loudly the word bounced off the ceiling beams.
Jenna and Olivia were there in a blink, Peter and Mark right behind them with the brand of alertness fathers get in the half-second between sleep and a yell. Everyone talked at once. "It's fine," I said, palms up. "Nobody panic. The bear, if it was a bear, took some provisions." Peter looked in the fridge. "Some? Mom, there's a ham missing." "Bears are paleo."
Jenna stared at the flower prints. "Are those paw prints?" "Could be mittens," I said. And that was the truth in its own way. Here's the thing about a manufactured crisis. People show who they are. Olivia's first instinct was inventory. She started checking cabinets, counting cans. Jenna's was logistics. We can ration, we can make a plan. Peter's was to look out the window and try to solve weather. Mark's was to laugh, then get serious, then put an arm around his wife. Henry was horrified that anyone would steal food, but impressed at the audacity. He'd make a fantastic judge someday. Leo wanted to save the bear from starving, and also save us from the bear, and also name the bear something like Waffles. I kept my voice steady and useful. "We're okay. We've got rice, pasta, peanut butter, those canned peaches from the Y2K backstock that survived 3 moves. But if we want anything fresh, we'll have to go get it." "We can't get down the mountain," Olivia said, looking at the window like a magic portal might appear. I pointed at the lake, spread smooth and white and quiet under the sky. Who said anything about down the mountain? "You want to fish?" Mark said, grinning, because he's always wanted to fish in weather that would make a moose put on a sweater. "I want to teach my grandson how to do something hard and show my son he still can." "What about me?" Peter said, feigning injury. "You and the younger crew can be mission control," I said. "Keep the fire roaring, make a pot of victory cocoa, and pray I don't fall in." "That is not funny," Olivia said, hand pressed to her heart. "I'm not joking," I said gently. "We'll do it right, cautious. This isn't a daredevil show. It's just a different kind of Christmas morning." "And lunch," Leah said, eyes like saucers. "Exactly," I said. Before we left, I put an index card on the fridge, written in my neatest teacher scrawl. "Gone to the lake, back with fish, save us some miracle cookies." I knew they'd bake. That's what people do when they're worried and want to be useful. They make sweet things to trick the heart into trusting. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the second half of that day, the part where we do a little dance with ice and patience and luck, isn't the beginning of the lesson. The beginning was the woods, where fear leaned in and I didn't flinch, and the youngest saw the old woman in his life draw a line in the snow and say, "We'll be fine." We made preparations like we were in a movie montage. Layers of wool, dry socks double-checked, a borrowed pair of cleats over my boots to bite the ice, the old sled re-outfitted with an auger I'd bought at the feed store in town, because I have a streak of Boy Scout in me, despite never getting the chance to earn a badge. Mark slung the tackle box he hasn't touched since college over his shoulder and whistled. Henry watched me like I was the general of a small army. Leo asked if bears could ice skate. "Only if they believe in themselves," I told him. Before we stepped out, I caught Peter by the wrist. "Hey," I said softly, "earlier. Thank you." He nodded once. He looked like he wanted to say something earnest again, and then decided not to. He kissed my temple the way he did when he was 7 and wanted a snack while I was on the phone. "Bring a story," he said. "I always do." We set out, the 3 of us, as the storm caught its breath and let the world show through the flimsy veil. The snow sparkled like it was flirting. The air bit, but didn't chew. The lake sat ahead, flat as a plate, the kind that maybe belonged to someone else, and we were borrowing with respect. We tested the edge like polite guests. Mark first, wait low and cautious. Me next, the boys last with instructions repeated like a prayer. The ice sang, which is a thing it does. A long, otherworldly sound that travels through your souls into your spine. It's not danger singing, not by itself. It's just the lake telling you you're walking on music.
We shuffled out to the spot I'd picked, near a line of old holes someone else had made in a warmer moment, close enough to shore that we were always one quick hustle away, far enough that the fish might agree to a conversation. Mark's breath plumed like a locomotive. He couldn't believe we were doing this, he said, boyish and thrilled. You can't believe it because you think of me as a person who bakes scones and apologizes, I said, steady and amused. Today, I'm a person who packs an auger. He laughed aloud. You're something else. We drilled. It's a boring job if you don't understand suspense. If you do, it's exhilarating. The auger bit, the ice powder fountained up, Henry gasped, Leo giggled, and then sudden and dramatic, the blade sank through and the hole went dark. A little window into a different planet. We cleared it careful as surgeons. We set up our lines, bait like small arguments, patience like a blanket. We waited. Waiting is my native language. Librarianship taught me. If you are still, the answer often walks over to you. I showed Henry how to feel the subtle tug, the difference between imagination and invitation. I showed Leo how not to chatter his teeth into a storm of complaints. Mark and I didn't talk about the years we'd miscommunicated and made each other small. We watched the hole and let the cold teach us the same lesson at the same speed. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. Around us, the big world hushed. A hawk wrote cursive against the sky. The ice sang again, and we didn't even flinch. And then, blessedly, beautifully, my line jumped. Easy, I said, because I was saying it to myself as much as to the boys. I lifted, felt the wriggle that means you are briefly, kindly in charge of a small living thing's fate, and pulled. A flash of silver, a thunk against the ice, and there he was, our lunch, looking surprised to find himself in December air. Leo squealed, a noise that made my heart go loose. Henry beamed in a way that will someday be rare and earned. Mark whooped and then looked up at the sky like he was thanking whomever's on shift up there. We caught 2 more, one for me, one for Henry. Mark's line stayed stubborn, but I watched his face soften into something that wasn't about getting credit. It was about being there when other people made the magic happen. We hustled home like Arctic heroes. Careful steps, pink noses, the triumphant clatter of the sled. The porch smelled like flour and a lie, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and the truth. Olivia and Jenna had made cookies that were aggressively merry, red sprinkles and all. Peter lifted the fish like a trophy and bowed to me. The boys threw their arms around my middle like I was a tree they wanted to keep. We ate late that afternoon, the kind of late that makes the day feel long enough to hold everything. Pan-fried fish with butter and lemon I'd squirreled away like a raccoon with a refined palate, roasted potatoes from the cellar, a salad that felt like an apology to our arteries, and those cookies I'd suggested into existence. The table buzzed. People interrupted each other and no one minded. We were warm and ordinary and something better than both. After dinner, Mark did the dishes, Peter dried, Jenna wiped the counters, Olivia reorganized the pantry like she'd been wanting to her entire adult life but never had permission. The kids sprawled on the rug and drew a comic about a criminal bear named Todd, who only steals fruitcake and leaves IOUs. Even Max gurgled like a backup singer. When the boys were in pajamas and the house smelled like soap and wood smoke, I stood by the window and looked out at dark. Behind me, the conversation turned toward tomorrow. Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day, and I felt the familiar itch of the reveal. The theater critic inside me cleared her throat. I'd set the stage, directed my actors, delivered 2 tidy acts. A good story earns its third. But I didn't want a dramatic unmasking with finger-pointing and gasps. I didn't want anyone to feel tricked. I wanted them to feel blessed. I wanted them to understand the shape of the last 6 years without me having to hold up a billboard that said, "Look what you did."
So I chose my moment for the next day, the exact hour, after cocoa, before stockings, when an old woman with cold hands and a warm voice could stand up in the living room of her own making and tell the truth without anybody bolting for a brunch. For now, I sat. I let Mark bring me tea. I let Peter tuck an extra blanket around my knees like he'd done when he was small, and I was the soft place he climbed into when he had a nightmare. I let Olivia hand me a cookie, and I let Jenna lean her head on my shoulder for exactly 5 seconds, the most tender seconds of the entire week. And I didn't cry, not because I'm brave, but because I was full.
The storm outside made a new sound, less rage, more distant applause. The road down the mountain was still shut, the plow still doing its noble work elsewhere, the calendar still blissfully empty of other people's obligations. The cars, bless their wounded hearts, were still going nowhere. We were here, not trapped, held. And in the morning, we'd unwrap more than gifts. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Christmas Eve settled over the cabin the way a shawl settles over old shoulders, soft, warm, and a little glittery in the firelight. The fish sizzled themselves into saints, and the boys invented new adjectives, crispy sparkly and lemony hero, that made the grown-ups grin into their plates. I kept stealing glances at my sons. If you've ever watched two men realize at the same time that they're safe and wanted, you know the expression, a kind of unbuttoning behind the eyes. They weren't glancing at their watches, they weren't dividing the day into someone else's obligations, and nobody was coordinating the exact minute a casserole had to be transferred to a minivan. There was just us and an old house that creaked like it had opinions. The storm had changed its personality. The tantrum was over. Now it whispered and rearranged. Icicles fattened into glass candles. The porch railing wore fur. A pine branch near the window carried so much snow, it looked like a surprised old man with his eyebrows overwhelmed. If you stood very still, you could hear the lake singing under its lid, low, wail-soft notes that made everyone instinctively use their indoor voices. We did Christmas Eve the only way the cabin allowed, simply. The power flickered out and back like a stage light playing coy, so we left more to the fire and the candles than to the outlets. Olivia and Jenna, who had come into this thinking they were navigating a fragile mother-in-law situation with the delicacy of diplomats, were now comparing cookie recipes like boxers comparing injuries. Jenna swore by a trick with powdered milk. Olivia swore by resting the dough because TikTok said so. I swore by butter and the Lord. After dinner, we moved to the living room, which sounds fancier than it is. The whole cabin is a single long room with corners pretending to be other rooms. We hauled the stockings off the mantel and laid them flat on the coffee table, like patients who needed triage. Stockings are a miracle of low-stakes generosity. You can tuck in a deck of cards, a pair of silly socks, a tiny jar of jam that tastes like summer agreed to visit winter for an hour. I'd stashed little things in drawers all autumn. A harmonica, a keychain tape measure, hot sauce, Sudoku booklets for the boys, a lipstick for each daughter-in-law that neither of them would have chosen and both immediately loved. Some skills never leave you. Peter turned on Carol so old they cracked a little around the edges. Mark stretched out on the rug until Leo lay on top of him like a sequin blanket. Henry configured the chess set he'd found in the loft, looking so serious you'd think a UN resolution depended on the outcome. Max chewed a soft block with the ferocity of a tax auditor. I kept catching Peter's eye. He'd give me that look, that "oh, Mom" look, that says, "I see you running the ship and I'm not mad about it."
The same look he used to give me in middle school when he forgot his lunch and I appeared at the office with a brown bag and a joke. 1 peanut butter, no jelly because you're sweet enough. He'd grown then, but he ate it. He always did. Before bed, I went to the porch alone. The stars were painfully bright, the kind of bright that makes you both religious and small. Somewhere down in the valley, a plow threw sparks and kept on going. The calendar in my head, the one with 6 ghostly Christmases circled in pencil, started to smudge at the edges. I breathed the cold until it touched the deepest, oldest part of grief and asked it a question. Are you finished? Grief, gentle but not anxious to leave, whispered back, almost.
In the morning, I woke to a cabin full of whispering. The boys were up first, of course. Children rise on Christmas by an internal alarm clock set at birth, and their parents were in that delicious, bleary state halfway between let's make memories and why did we ever procreate? But something else was up too. Coffee, yes. The smell of butter, yes. And sparkles? I padded to the living area. The stockings were puffed and standing at attention like jolly soldiers. A paper snowflake chain zigzagged along the ceiling, each loop labeled with a word: joy, thanks, home, together. Jenna had scissored her way through a ream of printer paper with the concentration of an artist, and Olivia had taped it all up with the gusto of someone who finally understood how to be part of a different family without feeling like she was betraying her own. Both of them turned when they heard me, cheeks pink, hair unbrushed, wearing the relieved smiles of women who did something right without being told. "Don't move," Olivia said. "We're bringing you coffee." And then she did it. She brought me coffee and handed it over like an offering. It was hot and strong and exactly how I take it. "Thank you," I said, and I let my voice tell the truth of the moment. She blushed like a teenager. Something old, brittle, and wildly boring between us cracked and fell away. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. We did stockings first because that's my rule, and the cabin respects rules if they're attached to delight. Henry unrolled a bundle of pencils and sniffed them like a wine critic. Leo blew 2 proud notes on the harmonica and startled himself into a giggle. Max clapped for everything. This is the privilege of babies. Perpetual applause. Peter got a new wool beanie he immediately pretended was a crown. Mark got a jar of fancy pickles and a book of dad jokes he promised to keep sealed at all times except emergencies. We oohed and awed and made the appropriate noises. Then it was time for presents. We kept it small because we are not made of oil money and because the real gift was, well, that would be tomorrow's speech. But I'd tuck something under the tree for everyone. And the tree, bless its stumpy mayoral heart, looked proud of us. Peter's gift was a framed photo I'd printed at the library. Him at 18, standing on the pier at Lake Lanier, skinny as a hope, holding a bass and wearing a smile that could power a town. Mark's gift was an old LP I'd found at a thrift store, the album we wore out in '86, the one he'd lifted the needle on so many times. I can still hear the click. For the girls, I wrapped shawls I'd knit in the fall, one the precise red of a cardinal's chest, the other the pale blue of a winter afternoon. They both tried to say something gracious, and then just put them on and kept touching the fabric like it was both soft and alive. For the boys, I made them each a book. I know, that sounds like the librarian cliché, but I did. I printed photos of their father as a kid, muddy knees, missing teeth, triumphant over a Lego castle, and wrote captions in tidy block letters. Stories attached themselves to the pages like burrs. This is the day your dad climbed the magnolia tree and couldn't figure out how to get down. This is the Halloween he insisted on being a vacuum cleaner. Henry laughed out loud. The desire to audit every fact was suspended by delight. Leo kept putting his face close to each picture like he could inhale the memory. We had one last gift propped by the hearth, a cardboard box wrapped in newsprint. "Open it," Leo commanded. Peter and Mark tore the paper like toddlers. Inside, a puzzle I'd had printed, a photo of the cabin the day I'd signed the papers. When we finished it, I knew I'd tell them the story I'd worked so hard to live. We did not rush. When you've been made to wait for something, really wait with all your muscles, you learn patience's sweeter cousin, savoring. We poured more coffee. We ate cinnamon rolls that the girls conjured out of the disgraced frozen dough we'd found in the back of the freezer. The generator did us the courtesy of staying awake.
The weather radio said things in the bureaucratic monotone of a polite god. Secondary roads remain impassable. Translation, stay with your mother, boys. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out.
Late morning brought a very particular brand of chaos. The kind where everybody is happy and nobody knows where the scissors went. We built the puzzle in fits and starts on the dining table, Henry managing corners with a competence that will make him a formidable manager someday. Mark took Max out onto the porch, bundled like a loaf, to show him the 3 cardinals who arrived, gaudy as parade floats, to pluck at the seeds I'd sprinkled on the rail. The baby recognized his own reflection in the window and clapped for the clever boy in the glass. I've never seen my son so still. Olivia FaceTimed her parents. She showed them the cabin and the tree and the boy's missing socks. They made a good show of being cheerful, and I did the good show thing too, appearing in frame just long enough to wave and say, "We'll bring them to you next week." Something in her mother's face softened while she looked at me, then softened again when she looked at her daughter under my roof. Oh, I thought. Perhaps this is how kingdoms make treaties, not with paper, but with coffee and grandchildren in footy pajamas. At lunch, we ate leftovers because that's the best holiday meal there is. The boys built a fort out of couch cushions that would not pass any code, but made an excellent title, Fort Bear. They wrote a sign, Todd not allowed. The bear, it seemed, had acquired lore. He was harmless now, a rogue with a backstory and a taste for ham. Henry explained, with the gravitas of a judge, that the flower prints we'd found were smallish, which suggested Todd was not full-grown. He gave me a look like maybe he suspected Santa was also involved. I raised an eyebrow in my best librarian way, which is the closest I come to pleading the fifth. After naps, because Christmas requires them, we bundled and went outside for the kind of play that leaves noses running and hearts cured. We sledded in the back meadow on a plastic saucer that tried to throw me off and failed. Peter and Mark raced once, because boys are boys until their knees file a formal complaint, and then they raced again because they have never in their lives learned from a knee. Jenna demonstrated a respectable snow angel. Olivia tried, failed, declared the snow shady, and then laughed at herself, which I loved even more. At the edge of the woods, Leo found an old trail of our ribbon markers, and the boys started a new game, Find the Way Home. It wasn't lost, not really, just a loop that led from the big pine to the woodpile and back, and they played it with the meditative joy of monks. "Grandma," Henry announced from atop the woodpile like a foreman, "we will never run out of wood if we are careful." I saluted. "Captain, yes, sir." Inside again, cheeks sore from smiling, we settled into the afternoon's gentle drift. The puzzle gained a corner, then another. Olivia and Jenna slipped into the kitchen, moving around each other like women who had decided, without a summit, to be sisters today. Peter repaired a stubborn kitchen drawer with the kind of focused kindness that makes me forgive 12 years of missed holidays. Mark kneaded dough like it had personally insulted him. Max fell asleep in my lap so heavily I thought I might have to wear him forever. It was during that perfect domestic hum that the house decided to throw us one more plot twist. The generator coughed, grumbled, and fell silent. This time it didn't surge back to life. The lights gave a final flicker, like a polite curtsy, and we were in the old-fashioned dark again. We all froze, listening for a resurrection that didn't come. The quiet swelled until it gently touched everyone's nerves. Nobody panicked. Well, Olivia said, "Oh no," and picked up the baby like a talisman, but nobody panicked. "All right," I said, clapping once the way you clap our classroom. "We know this dance. Fire up, candles, pots to the stove. If it stays out, it stays out. We've got skills." We moved. The boys collected the candles like acolytes. Mark coaxed life from the embers with a breath like a love letter. Peter checked the fuel outside, stomped snow off his boots, and shrugged, empty. The road, the plow, the mountain, none of that would offer us rescue today. But we didn't need it. The cabin, old and unbothered, had weathered worse people than us. Dinner became a chuck-it-all-in soup that tasted better than anything we could have planned. I'd promised the speech for tonight, after cocoa before stockings, but the dark had different plans. We ate by fire, face to face, no screen to make us blue. The boys told jokes so bad they circled back to good. I told the story of the Christmas their dad got a drum set from a yard sale,
And our neighbor called the house so often, we eventually invited him to dinner, because we figured if he was going to keep us company, he might as well eat.
When the bowls were empty and the fire was loud, I stood. The room lifted its attention, obedient and kind. I could feel every version of myself: young mother, sharp widow, exhausted librarian, invisible grandmother, line up inside me to watch. "I have something to say," I began. Peter leaned forward, elbows on knees. Mark rested his chin in his hand. Olivia and Jenna's eyes softened. The boys whipped their heads toward me like owls. Even Max stirred and then, as if wise to his part in the drama, settled content against Olivia's shoulder. I paused. The speech I'd practiced sounded too tight in my head. That wouldn't do. I needed something warmer, something that could survive the cold months that would follow us back down the mountain. "Tomorrow," I said instead. "After breakfast, before we open the puzzle again, I want to tell you a story. A true one. And I want you to listen like you're listening to a song you don't know the words to yet, but you like the melody." Peter's mouth twitched. "Is this about Todd the bear?" he teased, but his voice was careful around the edges. "In a way," I said. "In the way that all our stories are about the things we pretend are accidents." Henry nodded like a tiny judge approving a plea deal. Leo whispered, "I knew it." "Tonight," I continued, "we rest. We enjoy what we've made here. We be together the easy way. Tomorrow, we'll do it the brave way." No one argued, maybe because the lights were out and the fire was doing its ancient hypnosis, maybe because the storm had shaken our brains into the same jar. Maybe because everyone sensed in that animal way that a truth was coming and it would be better received with oatmeal in our bellies. We put the boys to bed in a tangle of cousins and whispered dares. Olivia doled out kisses like sprinkles. Jenna tucked blankets with a precision that made me want to hand her a nursing cap. The grown-ups drifted to their rooms. The night was the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heart. I sat by the fire a long time, running my thumb along the worn arm of the chair, and let the speech unknot itself. It would not be scalding. It would not be a ledger. It would be a thank you note with footnotes. Sometime after midnight, the cabin sighed. The storm finally lost interest in us and wandered away, bored. I slept the sleep of a woman who has chosen her own ending. Christmas morning broke bright as a brass band. I woke to sunlight so clean it made every dust mote look like confetti. Out the window, the whole world was wrapped and ribboned. The road still hid under a duvet. The plow had not attempted our stubborn little drive. The cars, oh, those poor cars, sat looking like iced cakes. The generator, perhaps offended by our independence, remained silent. Fine. Let it sulk. We had fire and cinnamon and the muscle memory of people who've handled worse. We made breakfast like a symphony. Peter scrambled eggs. Jenna conjured a skillet of potatoes that got crispy in all the right places. Olivia poured batter for pancakes and coaxed them to flip at exactly the right utopian moment. Mark brewed cowboy coffee that could stand up in a fight and offered it around with mock gravitas. The boys set the table and somehow remembered forks. Max did his morning laps around the coffee table, shrieking every time he discovered his own reflection. I kept my seat at the head of the table because I am done giving away chairs. When everyone sat, I let the noise crest and then touched my spoon to the rim of my mug. The room's sound slipped down a notch, like a jukebox obeying a coin's last request. All right, story time. Henry folded his hands like a miniature senator. Leo tucked his toes under him the way he does when he wants to be small but can't manage it. Peter, who had never in his life liked being scolded, looked at me with a little boy's faith.
Mark's mouth quirked, ready to laugh if invited, ready to listen if not. Olivia and Jenna leaned in as if we were a book club at a deliciously scandalous chapter. I want to tell you about 6 Christmases, and then about this one. The words came, not the rehearsed ones, but the ones that had marinated in the cabin's old wood. I talked about the first year I spent alone, how I cried in the bathroom because the tiles didn't care. I talked about the second year, how the neighbor boy waved like he was saluting a ship. I told them about volunteering and about eggnog for one and about pretending to be fine, the American sport none of us are actually good at. I did not say their names as culprits. I said my name as a person who had been lonely.
I am not punishing you, I said, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. I am showing you the shape of me. Peter's mouth trembled. He bit it hard and nodded. Mark put his hand flat on the table like he needed to feel the surface of something real. And then I bought a cabin, I continued, and I smiled because I couldn't help it, because the memory of the first time I turned the key is a private fireworks show. And I invited you all, and the weather did what weather does, and maybe a few other things did what other things do. I lifted one eyebrow in the general direction of flour, coolers, and wounded automobiles without offering exhibits. Olivia actually laughed, a relieved, understanding sound. Jenna's eyes were wet in the pretty way. The boys looked at me like I'd grown 3 inches and a cape. I wanted us to be here, I said simply, not to punish, but to practice, to remember, to make something that we will crave next year and the next and the next, to teach you what it means to show up even when the calendar tries to seduce you. And just as I drew breath to continue, the front door rattled and a muffled voice shouted, "Ho! Anyone home?" We all jumped. Peter stood, eyebrows up. Mark went for his boots. I went for my composure. On the porch, a man, bundled to the eyeballs in county orange, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Behind him, the world glittered with the insolent beauty of a morning after. "Road's not open yet," he announced through his scarf, "but we're doing a wellness check on the cabins up this way. You folks good? Need anything? Gas? Chains?" Peter looked at me. Mark looked at me. The girls looked at each other. The boys looked like raccoons caught in a heist. I stood and smiled, as if I'd been expecting him. "We're fine," I said. "We have heat, food, water, and each other." The man's eyes crinkled above his scarf in a way that said he'd seen the opposite all week. "Lucky," he said. "I'll come back this afternoon with a little fuel, just in case." "That would be neighborly," I said. He stomped away, leaving a trail that glinted like spilled sequins. The boys whooped softly, like we'd been judged by a benevolent Santa and found sufficient. We sat down again. I wrapped both hands around my mug just to have somewhere to put them. The room waited. This was the moment. The reveal. The aperture between before and after. I smiled. "Where were we?" I asked, knowing exactly where we were, standing at the threshold of a new tradition, one that did not depend on weather or luck or my minor in theater. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. I cleared my throat, and the cabin did that holy hush again, the kind that makes you aware of your own pulse. The sunlight fell in big squares across the table, turning our breakfast into a still life. Steam from coffee, butter glistening on pancakes, 2 crayons abandoned mid-doodle. I could see all of us, then and there, as if I were looking down from the ceiling, the family we were and the family we might dare to be. 6 Christmases that I'd tried to tell myself didn't matter, but they did.
I kept my voice warm and even. I wasn't there to prosecute. I'm not going to assign blame. I'm going to tell you how it felt and what I decided to do about it. No one moved. Even Max, that ambassador of drool, went still in Olivia's lap. It felt like being a book returned to the library and shelved wrong. I was there, ready to be found, but no one knew where to look. So I bought a place where the catalog would be simple. Here. I tapped the table once. Here. Peter swallowed. Mark looked at the window, then back at me like he was choosing not to run from a hard thing. I didn't cause the storm. I didn't wreck your cars. That's a line a hurt woman says in her head when she wants to feel powerful. What I did do was pick my moment, make sure the generator was serviced, stack the wood high, and invite you with enough sweetness you couldn't outright refuse. I also decorated with flour and borrowed a little theater from a librarian's prop closet. Leo burst. Not Todd, Henry corrected, loyal to the truth as he understands it. Grandma. Guilty, I said, holding up a hand. I staged a bear heist you could clean up with a sponge. I took you into the woods on a path with ribbons I'd tied myself and pretended to be a little more uncertain than I was, just long enough for us to need each other. And I took my Mark ice fishing, because sometimes the only way to talk to a man is to give him something to do with his hands while he listens.
Peter blew out a breath that did not know it was a breath until that moment. "Mom," he said, "we left you out." His voice wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite. Blunt. Tired of itself. True. "I don't need a courtroom confession," I said, smiling with all the softness I have. "I need a plan." Olivia set her coffee down with care. "We've been bad at this," she said. No waiver, no PR gloss. "I let my parents' machine set our schedule because it was easy. And I never pushed back because pushing back makes me feel like a bad daughter. But I don't want to be a bad daughter-in-law either, or a bad mother to boys who think women are optional." Jenna nodded, eyes glossy. "My parents are sweet and chaotic. They take up space because they don't know they are. I've let it happen, and I didn't know how to help us make new traditions without hurting old feelings." She looked at me, earnest. "You made one. You did it. You made one." "I made conditions," I corrected gently. "Traditions are earned." Peter leaned forward like a man about to sign a contract. "How do we make it right?" he asked. "We start by not trying to make it right," I said, and the boys watched me as if I were instructing them on a new magic trick. "We make it better. We decide what we are going to do, not what we're sorry for not doing. Apologies are necessary. Calendars are how we prove them." He winced a little, like he'd swallowed an honest pill too fast. "Okay," he said. "Rules." "Not rules," I said. "A pact." Mark cracked a smile. "The Christmas compact." "Exactly," I said, grateful for a son who can name a thing in a way everyone wants to sign. I held up an index finger, the universal librarian sign for business. "Here's my offer." I laid it out like I'd rehearsed it by the fire at 2 a.m. The compact went like this. Christmas Eve through the morning of the 26th belongs to this cabin. No brunches, no swinging by, no carving a ham at 2 different houses and pretending it's festive. The mountain gets us. Whole. The Saturday before Christmas is free to the in-laws. We go. We show up early. We stay late. We wash their dishes. We let them take the pictures they want. I will even wear a wreath-shaped headband if it helps. Thanksgiving alternates. Formal as a handoff at the 50-yard line. Even years here, odd years there. No resentment allowed on premises. It melts the butter and curdles the gravy. A maintenance fund for the cabin, small but steady, that the boys and the girls contribute to monthly. You don't owe me for the cabin, I clarified before anyone could bristle. This is not rent.
It's buy-in. It's how we all say, with dollars and not just feelings, this matters. A family group calendar. Birthdays and recitals. Yes, but also the little things. The school art show. The random Tuesday soccer game. The day I get my mammogram so someone texts me a dumb joke. The calendar is our love letter. We will read it. A new rule for me. If I feel invisible, I will say it out loud. Not in code, not as a joke. Out loud. And a new rule for you. You will listen without defending. I stopped. I watched their faces. The silence was thick, but not hostile. It was the kind of thick you get with good soup. Peter rubbed his jaw, thinking. Yes, he said finally. Yes to all of it. Mark nodded, slow but sure. I'll set up the fund this afternoon. Auto debit. No, oops, I forgot this month. He looked at Jenna. We'll build Saturdays with your folks into the calendar like we would a flight. Not optional. Jenna sniffed and laughed at the same time. My mother will try to adopt you for knowing where the tape is at the right moment. Olivia reached across the table and touched my hand. It felt like a small bird landing. I'll call my parents after breakfast, she said. We'll tell them the plan. They will be dramatic, we will be calm, and then next Saturday we will show up at their house early with casseroles and a willingness to lose at whatever board game your dad picks. And then we'll leave at a reasonable hour and come here. Henry, who has been waiting his whole life for a contract, nodded solemnly. I will put it in a binder. Leo raised a sticky hand. What's a compact? I said, it's a promise with a spine. We ate in the relieved, bubbling way people eat when a thing that felt hard suddenly has corners and a name. We cleaned up with the choreography of a team that's found its rhythm. Mark and Peter in a dishwashing duet, the girls doing pantry ballet, the boys ferrying napkins like dignitaries. When the county man tromped back after lunch, he left us 2 gas cans and a grin, and declined the cookies with the desperation of a man who'd been gifted too many cookies this week. Stay warm, he called.
We are, I said, and I meant 3 different things. The rest of the afternoon unfurled like a ribbon. We finished the puzzle, and when the last piece, sky blue, stubborn, clicked into place, there was a little swallow of breath around the table that felt like a baptism. Peter took a photo of all of us pointing down, and later he set it as the lock screen on his phone. Mark found a hammer and hung the framed puzzle on the wall above the sideboard. He did it carefully, with a level. He stood back, admired his own work, and said, "Looks like it's always lived there." I thought, us too. We bundled for one last wander, a slow victory lap around the property. The sun slid behind the ridge and painted the snow with a blush. The kids stamped a sloppy heart into the meadow and wrote our names in it, uneven and perfect. Mom, Peter, Mark, Jenna, Olivia, Henry, Leo, Max. Leo didn't know how to spell apostrophes, so he just drew a little star next to Mom and then looked at me for approval the way boys do when they've invented a punctuation mark. I gave it to him. Of course I did. Halfway across the yard, Peter fell into step beside me. "You scared me in those woods," he said, voice low, not accusing, but in a good way, the kind that shakes something loose. I shook myself first, I said. He nodded. I know. We stood for a minute, watching our breath leave us and evaporate like the past sometimes mercifully does. You know, he said, I kept telling myself we were doing fairness, splitting holidays, managing expectations, not favoring one set of grandparents over the other. But fairness without attention is just math. I like math, Henry called from a snowbank, because of course he does. I like attention, I said to Peter, and he laughed in that cracked, grateful way that makes me forgive anyone anything. Back inside, evening gathered itself, the last one of our storm-soaked Christmas. I made one more pot of stew because I am who I am. We ate with elbows on the table, and no one corrected us.
After, we moved to the chairs, and I put on a record that came with the cabin. An old Carol's album with a scratch right through Oh Holy Night, so the singer sounded like he was pleading with a cat. We danced anyway. The boys invented a new move called the beached seal in honor of the boulder. Jenna did a twirl that made Max shriek. Olivia dipped Peter and almost dropped him, then laughed so hard he had to kiss her to make her stop. When the boys were finally blessedly asleep, we, adults, stayed up with tea and the kind of talk you don't manage when there's always somewhere else to be. We traded stories we'd never told. Jenna talked about the winter her mom took 2 jobs and braided her hair in the dark. Olivia told us about the pilgrimage her family makes every December to drive 3 hours to look at a single street of lights because her dad cried there once when she was little, and now it's their ritual, engraved by feeling. Peter admitted he hates the way gift exchanges turn into competitions. Mark admitted he's always been a little afraid of quiet. So we make some new quiet, own brand, trade tastes. They nodded. Then Mark, reluctant and sweet, asked, "Mom, did you really not do anything to the cars?" I smiled slow. I timed the invitations. I read the weather like scripture. I put a blanket in each trunk and an emergency kit because I'm not reckless. But no, son, I didn't sabotage a thing. I tapped his chest, right in the center. I trusted this to work. He put his hand over mine. It did. We went to bed on the good kind of tired. In the morning, the plow had chewed a path to our road, and the county man's chains had kissed the mountain enough that the world had edges again. We packed slowly, because departure is hard, even when you're ready. Olivia folded towels like prayer flags. Jenna labeled the pantry shelves, pastas, soups, sweets, because she speaks fluent order when she wants to say, "I love you." The boys made a map of the cabin, exits, super secret loft, bear-proof zone, and tucked it into the Monopoly box so that future us will always have it. At the cars, Peter hugged me with a strength he used to save for touchdowns. He didn't do that man thing where they clap your back to keep from feeling it. He just held on. "We'll call," he said, and then corrected himself. Truer. "We'll schedule. You'll see it come through this afternoon."
Mark lifted the empty gas can into his trunk, a talisman of our small rescue, and kissed my cheek. "Auto debit," he said. "Auto love," I said back, because I am still 64 and hilarious. The engines turned. The mountain, generous and stern, let them go. They rolled down the drive, brake lights winking like eyes about to cry and deciding not to. I waved on the porch until the taillights disappeared. Then I went inside and leaned against the door and listened to the silence, the way you listen to a seashell, for the echo of a big, kind thing. "Okay," I told the house. We did it. The week after was not a fairy tale. Re-entry never is. There were texts to field from in-laws who needed explanation, some grumbles from the peanut gallery, a brief and glorious scandal about whether the compact was controlling. Olivia handled her side with grace that would have impressed Congress. Jenna did too. Peter sent the shared calendar invite while still in the driveway. Mark set up the fund and named it Hot Buttered Tradition because he knows how to make paperwork go down like dessert. The girls added items immediately. March 12th, Max's first swim lesson. April 3, Olivia's work presentation. Send flowers? April 4, Jenna's mom's checkup. Text her dad a corny joke. A week later, a package arrived at my bungalow. Inside, a wooden sign that looked like it had been burned by hand. "The compact cabin," it read. And under it, a line that made me sit down on the kitchen chair and put my hand over my mouth, "Where we choose each other." I took it up the mountain the next morning. I hung it by the door with Mark's level because that puzzle had converted me to carpentry. I made a fire and watched the flames knit themselves together like a good story.
I put the sign's little bag of screws and extra anchors into the kitchen drawer with the spare batteries and a note to myself about the generator's next service. I poured coffee. I sat. I let the house teach me its afternoon light. Spring crept up the mountain, and with it came a new habit. Tuesday at 5, FaceTime with the boys. Every other Sunday, dinner here, even if we ate chili out of mugs on the porch because the table was buried under a jigsaw. August, a long weekend where we taught the kids how to bait hooks without drama and how to sit in the shade and do exactly nothing without feeling like failures. October, leaf peeping and apple butter and the kind of laughter that makes a woman forget exactly where the sting used to be. December came again like a ring returning to its place on the finger. They arrived early this time, before the weather could flex. Peter brought his in-laws for the Saturday we had promised them, and guess what? We like them. They brought a lasagna and 2 loud stories and left in the dark with hugs that felt like forgiveness. We kept our side of the deal the next day. Just us, the cabin, 2 new stockings with Max's name spelled right, and a small golden bell that Leo claimed he could hear when the house was happy. Midway through that second Christmas, the generator tried its old bit again, and we laughed like men at a magic show who now know the trick and love it more for that knowledge. Mark put more wood on the fire with a flourish. Olivia handed me coffee just the way I like it. Jenna pinched a piece of pie off Peter's plate, and he let her because that is what family is. Stealing and smiling. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. Here's how it plays out. Nothing explodes. No car is truly wrecked. No bridges burned. No one gets precisely what they deserve in the cinematic sense. What happens instead is that a woman my age decides she is not optional. She writes herself into the calendar in ink. She uses weather and wit and a light hand with flour to make an argument more persuasive than any speech. The men she raised listen. The women who married them choose in bravely. The children watch and learn that love is logistics dressed as cinnamon and wood smoke. I am not a victim. I was wronged, yes, but I made something. I staged a week and then turned the stage into a life. That is my revenge. I built a tradition so lovely no one wants to skip it, and I attached it to rules that make it harder to forget me. Financial, the fund dings my account each month with quiet love. Social, the group calendar is a constant ticker tape parade for all of us. Legal, honey, the only contracts I need are the ones we keep on purpose.
Sometimes I still think about the 6 Christmases. I don't pretend they didn't happen. I shelve them where they belong. They taught me the weight of an empty chair. They taught me that waiting is not the same as inviting. They taught me that a plan can be a prayer. This morning, a full year after the storm, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched a pair of cardinals argue like an old married couple. Behind me, the cabin breathed like a very content dog. Inside, on the mantel, our stockings waited. On the wall, the puzzle glowed. On the door, that sign told the truth over and over. And in my phone buzzed a message from Peter, leaving now with time to spare. Then from Mark, bringing kindling and pickles. Then from Olivia and Jenna, almost at the same moment, the messages that still make me ridiculous with happiness. Can't wait to be home. Home. Not a brunch on someone else's timetable. Not an apology dressed as logistics. Not a favor. Home. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. And tell me, what would you have done in my place?
So, another story of my grandmother has sent, and be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.